This is a 1980s detached house, so a house built 1985 to 1990. You shouldn't really find too many problems with it, and structurally it is sound, but the architect builder, I don't know, seems to have gone to a lot of trouble to make it interesting with lots of brick details. I do wonder whether that's not a mistake really, because you know, bricks are supposed to interlock. Because the wind is so noisy, I've decided to mute myself and give you a running commentary from here. But I think those bricks that are laid at the top of the gable wall are instinctively going to want to slide off. So what's fixing them into position is not abundantly clear. Presumably there's some metal brackets in there, but if they are relying on that brick at the foot of the eaves, that's eventually going to get pushed out, especially if it weathers, so hopefully not. The house is presumably 35 years old now, so there's plenty of aging and deterioration. So the bay, for example, has weep vents over the bay roof, so that any rainwater that does penetrate the outer skin of the cavity wall can trickle out rather than emerge within the interior of the property in the bay reveal. But that little slot there should have a vent cover to it, and that's missing. The bay is mostly rendered, and the builders used angled beads there to create nice straight edges. These are supposed to be, well, they'll be made of steel, which will rust, but they are supposed to have been galvanised, which is basically dipped in zinc in some way. So the zinc prevents the steel work from corroding, but some 35 years into the lifespan of the building, they quite clearly are corroding, so that's another form of deterioration that's beginning. And there's a masonry paint finish which is beginning to go puffy, so that's going to start peeling off the wall as well in the near future. I mean, to an extent it is doing so already. This is a third skin of masonry applied to the outside of the cavity wall, again for architectural effect, but the mortar of that joint there is weathered and it's coming out, and well, it's going to be prone to increased rain penetration, and then you're going to have the freeze-thaw process breaking up that mortar joint, as well as the other bricks and mortar increasingly often. Here we've got more evidence of the house showing its age, and an interesting illustration of the damp-proof course working. So some of the bricks below damp-proof course level are now spalling, so the fronts of the bricks are coming away. And this is because these bricks are saturated with rainwater more often, so they've got rising dampness, which is rising up to and hitting the damp-proof course, freezing and expanding and forcing the brickwork off, and there's another bit of deterioration there, and various other bricks are affected in the same way elsewhere. The bricks used are calcium silicate bricks rather than natural clay bricks, and I think this increases the risk that the brickwork might shrink shortly after construction, resulting in these little fractures we can see. So this one's in the front left corner of the house, and going around the corner here's another one just under the window there. So it's fairly hairline, and it's probably been like that since shortly after construction, and it's not going to get any worse. The green box there is containing a water softener, and a bit more about that later. This is the rear elevation. These bricks will have been manufactured with a certain amount of pigment, but with some inconsistency. So each time the brick manufacturer delivers a batch to the site, they're a slightly different colour to the last lot. So you end up with this sort of bands of different coloured bricks, which looks a little bit messy as the house goes up. There's a little bit of weathering to the verge, and there's that rather vulnerable looking brick at the junction of the verge with the gable wall. Down at the foot of the wall we've got this little gap where rainwater can percolate in between the third skin of brick and the main wall and possibly do a bit of frost damage down there. There's a pointed in drill hole indicating that there's cavity wall insulation, and if we scroll along the mortar joint we will eventually find another one. There it is, so that's a sign of cavity wall insulation. These bricks are, well, many of them are stained with white stuff. Now this is, I suppose, some form of efflorescence. Now we know what efflorescence is. It's basically as moisture in the building process dissolves chemicals, salts if you like, and then passes through the masonry and evaporates out, it leaves them behind on the surface. And you quite often see sort of fluffy white crystals, but this house is now very old, so any such fluffy white crystals would have been lost, but we've got this sort of white staining which is a little bit peculiar. I've suggested already these are calcium silicate bricks, so the word calcium might be significant, and we're in Wiltshire and in a hard water area, so the water possibly used in mixing the mortar will have had a lot of calcium in it as well. I don't know where the bricks were made, so possibly it's calcium that's deposited on the surface of these bricks, which is not at all willing to weather away either. Bear in mind these are supposed to be red bricks. This amount of staining strikes me as being a bit of a failure in either the building process or the manufacturing process, and some of the houses on site are really a rather unpleasant smudgy white colour rather than red brick. So anyone want to advise me on what this is, I'll be pleased to hear.
The roof, quite clearly, truss rafter roof. It's got metal straps fixing the gable walls onto the roof structure. There's plenty of bracing, so it's braced across the hangers up there, braced across the struts, double braced across the struts, braced across the rafters, so plenty of bracing. And what is a bit odd, where is it? Down there, and I zoom in a bit, I'm standing in a very precarious position, and there we go. You're going to play ball camera. Not enough light really, is there? Over there you can see the underlay's fallen to pieces, it's got a great big hole in it. Very strange. Camera's not happy. This is the rear left bedroom, not that that really matters, but we've got a damaged ceiling here, so it's bulged, you can see signs of leaking, and there's a crack where it's bulged, and it's been sort of, has it been patch repaired? Probably not. But if we go in the roof, this is me going in the roof. Need a light for this. We've got that. So there's plastic plumbing onto a brass piece and a plastic piece with a wire coming out. Now I've absolutely no idea what that is, but it seems to be where the leak was. So whether it's part of the repair or anyway, don't know what that is. It is possible, of course, being by the loft hatch, that the damage is caused by people chucking stuff in the attic. I've seen that before. People dumping Christmas trees or whatever on plastic plumbing in the roof, and of course they break the joints and it leaks. And these two doors, that's the bathroom door and that's the rear left bedroom door, are both awkward, as if they've been affected by the moisture coming down from the roof space above, possibly. Front right bedroom, shooting a camera into lights doesn't help very much, but this house is empty and it is winter, so one might expect building materials to start shrinking and contracting, and this could indeed lead to cracking, and this is exactly what's going on here, I suspect. So whilst you find cracks in these sort of positions quite commonly, in this property there's a hell of a lot of them. Here we've got a sort of Y-shaped crack, so that's actually delineating the shape of one of the aggregate blocks forming the internal skin of the cavity wall. And up here we've got a little horizontal fracture towards the top of the wall, vertical fracture over the window, and a horizontal fracture between the wall and the ceiling. And there are cracks of this nature all over the place. There we go, more of the same, cracking in the corner of a room at the junction with a partition and over the lintel. Another thing worth considering as I amble around the house aimlessly is that the water supply has been terminated. Basically, they turned it off at the stop tap, which is in the downstairs WC, but the system's not drained. So there's still water in the system. And we have had some ferociously cold weather. Well, it's not cold now. But it does mean that, water in the system could have frozen, expanded and broken some pipes, and when the water supply is turned back on, then we could have some surprise leaking. There's the stop tap down there, for what it's worth. So I think it's probably worth suggesting to the customer that they get a plumber to turn the water on, check it for leaks, and then drain it down properly in the short term. Otherwise they could have some rather nasty surprises when they move in. Yeah.
This is a water softener sitting outside the house. It was in a box which I just removed, which has some insulation incorporated into it, but I'd have thought this is also relatively vulnerable to freezing and bursting as well.
I know little about services, but here's the boiler, and you get used to seeing certain boilers a lot, and this one is by, well, it's called Bolter Economy, so that'll be the manufacturer Bolter, and I don't see these, so this has got to be an original boiler. It's oil fired. So if it goes back to the 1980s, it's going to be relatively energy inefficient. It's got a fairly rusty box in there, not a great deal of insulation, which is also looking rather ragged, and all these joints are looking a bit rusty and tired as well. So, I think it's probably worth suggesting to the customer that they think about having the boiler replaced with something modern and energy efficient.
There is this modern plastic oil tank in the garden and some kind of cement fibre board acting as fire protection between the oil tank and the neighbour's garden. The house was built in 1986, I think I decided, so they're still using asbestos in those days, so just a possibility that it has asbestos in it, which is worth alerting, making your customer aware of. Doesn't really look like asbestos, so it probably isn't, but there is a risk that that's an asbestos containing board, and one could say the same thing about the swirly artex to the ceilings as well. Well, I guess that's the end of that. So I suppose to summarise, one could say that a house built in the middle of the 1980s would normally be, and in this case is, in good structural condition, but it's now old enough to have suffered enough weathering and deterioration to start thinking about getting the builders in, although I dare say if you did get a builder in at this stage, he'd be scratching his head and wondering why you've bothered. So I think defects developing, but they can probably wait.